The United States is now effectively allowing Turkish troops to move into the northeastern Kurdish-controlled region of the country by withdrawing our own troops. Now, the White House made the announcement late Sunday evening, preparing the way for a Turkish offensive, possibly. Now, there have only been about 1,000 U.S. troops operating in the area, but their withdrawal all but gives Turkey free reign in an area controlled by the Kurds. Now, these are Turkey's longtime rival. So for more on what this will mean for the region and here in the United States, we are joined by former Naval Intelligence Officer John Jordan. John, when this happened yesterday, I immediately realized that I wanted to have you on to talk about this because it is a complex issue, but it's been up to debate. So just simply, if America had kept troops in northern Syria, would that have kept Turkey from going in, or is this something the Turks would have done anyways, and thus it's best to get our troops out of the crossfire?
Well, the Turks were going to do this anyway. There's a political and economic imperative. We only had 1,000 troops there, and that's not really a militarily viable number. That's there for advisors and so forth. The Kurds had fought alongside us for a long time in Iraq. The YPG Kurds are different from the PKK Kurds. The PKK Kurds is a group inside of Kurdistan and Turkey that the Turkish government regards as terrorists, and so do we. The YPG is a Kurdish group that the Turkish government regards as terrorists, but we regard as an ally. Basically, the Turks are going to push into Syria to create a 30-kilometer buffer zone. Most people don't realize this, but America's real leverage over Turkey here is economic. The Turkish economy has 14% unemployment. It's going to contract by 2.5% in their GDP per the International Monetary Fund this year. And they're subject to sanctions under CAATSA because of their purchase of the S-400 missile system. So I suspect that there's a lot of face-saving behind the scenes here. Turkey will move forward and will build that buffer zone and will move some of the 3+ million Syrian refugees out of Turkey and resettle them back into Syria. But both sides need to save some face here, and the United States will threaten economic sanctions under CAATSA, and the Turks will agree to perhaps take it easy on some of the Kurds who are friendly to the United States. But we'll see.
Well, that's interesting, and I'm glad that you brought that up because President Trump said he will destroy Turkey's economy if they do something very aggressive that he doesn't like. So do you think that fear is enough to keep them, as you said, just kind of doing this little minor move, or do you think they're going to go full out blown regardless of what the United States might or might not do economically?
The Turkish economy historically, Scottie, has been very, very vulnerable to sanctions. It's in a very, very precarious spot right now. It's the weakest in the region by far. Not only do they have the numbers we just talked about, those struggles, they have the largest number of refugees of any country right now, and nearly 4 million Syrians. And the Turks want to resettle about 2 million back into Syria. Threats by the United States on sanctions would be politically very easy for the United States and President Trump to do, especially in light of the S-400 under CAATSA and a variety of other regimes possible. So the Turks are vulnerable to that. So I think that is a lever that the president has, and it's one that the Turks will take seriously. The Turks aren't going to want to make a big mess or have a big humanitarian disaster and horror show in Syria. So they'll do what they need to do, but they'll try to do it quietly and keep the temperature down so as not to inflame public opinion around the world and in the United States and bring economic troubles upon themselves.
Well, and you mentioned the refugees, but I also want to talk about how you have a bipartisan group of lawmakers here in the U.S. who said this has just been a huge blow to national security, even here at home. Do you think there's any truth to this? And then I've also seen this meltdown for Republican senators post this announcement. So I have to go. Did the neocons just identify their true colors because they realized their bank accounts might not necessarily be getting as filled as they have been in the past from our military budget?
Well, we've been drawing down in Syria for some period of time. Basically, we withdrew from that. The contest over Syria going forward is going to be one between the Kurds, the Turks, the Bashar regime, the Iranians, and the Israelis. Those are the real, and the Russians. Those are the real players in Syria now. The United States, under Trump, has made the decision that really there are no important U.S. security considerations there, and we're down to just a token number of troops. America's leverage now exists, such as it is in the region, exists solely in the form of economic penalties that can be imposed on any one or several players. But the United States has largely ceded its role in Syria to those other countries.
John Jordan, like always, insightful and quite informative. Thank you so much for giving us all of your intelligence on this issue.
My pleasure, Scottie.
Tonight, we also have this breaking news. It appears Turkey is ready to invade Syria. In fact, there are reports that the bombing has already begun. The White House appears to be sending out some mixed signals on all of this regarding Turkey. So last night in a statement, it said that Turkey will invade northern Syria. The White House said that, right? But then later it said that it will not tolerate, endorse, or join in on Turkey's attack on Syria. And just today, just a little while ago, Newsweek is reporting that on a call last night between President Trump and the president of Turkey, Mr. Trump got, according to Newsweek, quote, rolled or dominated by Mr. Erdogan. The magazine is also suggesting that the attack on the Kurds will move them, the Kurds, to either side then with Syrian President Bashar Assad or into the camp with the Russians. Seeming to imply that they're going to run in one direction or the other, most likely the Russians. This story's got a lot of moving parts. Fascinating story, really. Joining us now to take us through this is RT correspondent Rachel Blevins. Can I start with Afghanistan? Because I just find it interesting. 18 years of war. I think you heard me mention it's more than the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, World War I, World War II combined. And yet, we're not even addressing it or talking about it as a country. What does that say to you?
Well, it says that the war isn't coming to an end anytime soon, and it also says that the enemy that we went in there to defeat, the Taliban, is more powerful now than it has been at any point since the war began. And that's not something that a lot of networks and politicians really like to talk about. And you know, it's interesting because we saw 11 months of peace talks in Afghanistan with the Taliban before President Trump suddenly pulled out last month and said that he wasn't going to have it because they were being violent. Yet if you look at who's being violent in Afghanistan, violence on behalf of the United States and its allies has skyrocketed in the last few years. 2018 saw the greatest number of civilian casualties since 2009. And then this year marked the first year that the U.S. and its allies killed more civilians in Afghanistan than the Taliban did.
It's amazing. It really is. And, you know, it's kind of a shame because we were, as you alluded to, reporting just about a month ago that there were Taliban talks and that there was a breakthrough. And then all of a sudden it's, you know, crickets. And now it looks like there's no end in sight. Let's move over to Syria, if we could. You heard what I just read about what the White House's statement was. They seem to be saying to Turkey, we don't want you to do this, but if you do, look, we throw our hands up. What, as far as you can tell, what is the White House strategy on this?
Well, it's interesting because they say that they're pulling around 100 special forces back from the northern border in Syria. And they came out and they said, well, we've defeated ISIS there. ISIS is 100% defeated according to President Trump. So we don't need those forces to be there. But then at the same time, they're saying, well, if there is some violence there, then we also don't want them to be there for that. So they seem to be sending mixed signals. But President Trump did speak out about this on Twitter, of course, and he specifically took to Twitter where he said that he defended this decision by writing that the U.S. has been in Syria for far too long, and it is time for us to get out of these ridiculous, endless wars and to bring our soldiers home. However, it's important to note that these special forces that are being taken away from the border, they're not coming on a plane and coming home. They're simply being relocated to another part of Syria from as far as we can tell.
I was noticing that the Republicans who are defending Trump on the impeachment deal are going after him. I mean, with a fury on this decision, apparently, to pull 1,000 troops out of Syria and let the Kurds do as they wish, if that's how they interpret it.
Right, exactly. Well, and you see, you know, this puts the Kurdish forces in Syria at risk, and the Kurds have been the ones who have been a really strong U.S. ally in going after ISIS. So we do have a lot of Republicans that are coming in and saying, wait a second, this opens the door so that Turkey can go in and do whatever they want with these forces that have been working with the U.S. And of course, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham has been a very strong voice in this, he's actually stepped away from President Trump on this. He also took to Twitter where he said that this move ensures that there will be an ISIS comeback. He said it forces the Kurds to align with Assad and Iran. It destroys Turkey's relationship with the U.S. Congress, and most importantly, he claims it will be a stain on America's honor for abandoning the Kurds. Now, President Trump has heard all of this. He's heard all of these concerns, and so he took to Twitter once again, and it was really interesting how he changed things up. He spoke out and he said, so now it's Trump versus Right, so now Trump has to defend this, and he's got to say, oh, wait, we got to defend the Kurds. And he wrote, quote, if Turkey does anything that I, in my great and unmatched wisdom, consider to be off limits, I will totally destroy and obliterate Turkey's economy. Now, this is interesting because he's bringing out his unmatched wisdom, not to question that at all, but he's essentially saying there are limits, but he's not telling Turkey what those limits are. Yet at the same time, he's pulling U.S. forces back and saying, okay, just in case there's some violence here, we don't want our forces here.
But he's right. I think if you were to ask or poll the American people, they would say we want out of that war just as we do Afghanistan. And at least he's apparently making efforts in that regard. By the way, Rick Sanchez, in my unmatched wisdom, thank you for that great report.